Hello, and welcome everybody to the Cosmos Patricians Conglomerate podcast, a Twilight Imperium podcast made by Cosmos Patricians for Cosmos Patricians. I'm going to be your host for the evening, Ignas Bengalis, and I would like to thank our main sponsor for the evening, the Cosmos Patricians Conglomerate, and the Association for letting me actually talk during our next games. Thank you everybody for not shutting me up. Today we're here with the top dog of our organization, the founder of the Cosmos Patricians Conglomerate, and the winner of last year's Twilight Fest mega game, Mr. Polo Sergeda. Polo, how are you today?
I'm doing very well.
That's
very well.
Wonderful to hear.
Thank you very much.
Now then, today for our conversation, I'd like to discuss with you the meta of Twilight Imperium 4. I would like to talk to you about basically what's good, what's bad, and why. And for a start, just basically a quick, fairly simple question. Polo, tell me, what do you think are the three best and three worst factions in the game?
The factions in the game. I would say if there's one thing that makes any faction to pick good is the flexibility that allows a player to achieve any of the objective and to be good enough for pretty much probably any situation that arises. And those factions are definitely there's quite a few of those that are flexible, but then on top of the flexibility, some sort of mobility options are probably the most important. From the top three, I'm just looking at the list of factions.
Take your time.
It's gonna be might be been a while since I've played. I would probably the bar none strongest faction. I think for me still are the Winnu.
Okay.
Mainly because after the rework that the expansion gave, they pretty much can hunker down and without any need of mobility, they can have enough resources to always be insanely advantaged over any other faction.
That's a fair point.
Other strong factions would probably be Nazroka Alliance and the Argent Flight, both being fairly similar, having good defensive options and having good options to protect their own zone of influence while having the mobility and flexibility to make the most of their resources without requiring any specific part of resources. No tech skips, no they're not over dependent on influence planets, which makes them good in every single situation and very reliably strong, and that's what probably makes the strongest factions.
That's a fair point. I like the fact that you mentioned that flexibility is extremely important in the game. I do agree with that particular sentiment. Um, One thing I might ask you to give your opinion on. Personally, I do agree with some of what you've said in terms of which factions are the best. What would you say is more important when we're talking about what makes a faction good and what makes a faction bad? Is it more important to be able to adapt, to be flexible, to adapt to any situation, any objective that might come up in the game? Or is it more important to basically meld with the mechanics of the game better? As an example, you mentioned the Nazroka Alliance as one of the strongest factions in the game, and I personally agree. I would say that they're the strongest faction in the game. Um, but that's, in my opinion, because they are built entirely, pretty much entirely on the exploration mechanic, and all of the abilities of the faction itself are based on the exploration mechanic. So as long as you explore, you're getting maximum payoff out of anything you can do as Nazroka. All you need to do is explore. So what's more important? Is it being able to adapt or being better suited to using the mechanics of the game itself for bigger rewards? Which is more important to make a faction good?
Well, I would say uh, that's probably the ability to adapt is way more important. But what I would contest here is that actually exploration is kind of ass. The explore mechanic doesn't really give good resources. It doesn't give consistent resources. What makes Nazroka so strong is that additionally to getting about double or triple the explorations than to the other players, you get the added benefit of very large consistency and uh, pretty much you can guarantee yourself very many relics during the game, which while I would say yes, that is that is uh, their main strength being exploration. They do synergize with the mechanic itself, but let's say Argent Flight, which also are Argent Flight. That's the wrong. Then this is why I need the list of the factions. The
Mhm.
Empyrean, which another faction that uses exploration. Uh, they're not. It's not really a main part of the faction simply because even when you're rewarded for exploring, even when getting frontier tokens is easy, that doesn't make them good because they don't get the
Mhm.
consistency. They can explore for free, but it takes time, it takes space, you need ships. Well, Nazroka just get that shit for free. And they get it way more consistently, and you get all of the benefits from exploration
Right.
consistently. And the that consistency is
Mhm.
what makes them strong, and that's what lets them adapt to very many situations. They've always have abundant resources because
I
of
do
that.
agree with that. Like in general, yes, exploration isn't very rewarding. Exploration isn't doesn't really give you a lot. What I meant by adapting to by playing to the mechanics of the game is specifically that exploration for the Nazroka is consistently rewarding, and it consistently specifically the mechanics of the Nazroka as a faction kind of just makes it so that exploration specifically for that faction is actually rewarding. And because it's rewarding
Yeah.
for them, basically they just get benefits that nobody else does through playing the exploration mechanics. And I do agree that at that point it does make them more flexible, more versatile, which is I suppose a middle ground the between those two outlooks that I proposed, between playing to the mechanics of the game and being versatile, and the middle ground between those two, which is basically the best of both worlds. Okay, so your top choices are the Winu, the Nazaroka, and the Argent Flight, right? What
Yep.
would be your bottom three choices?
Oh, the
Worst
worst
factions.
factions. Well, ooh, for the best factions, the easy thing is that in every single game, the best factions are the same ones because consistency is
Mm-hmm.
rewarded. Then when you get to the middle factions, you get like the maybe largely less consistent factions that are still
Mm-hmm.
strong. And then at the very bottom, you get factions that are situationally possibly very good, but those situations come up so rarely that
They're not a
they're
they're
terrible to
not a good
play.
gamble.
But definitely not a good not a good choice in the average game. But then when you see those factions being played, they're usually played in a situation that's favorable for them, and then they look quite a bit better. So it's really difficult. I would say definitely in the very bottom, I would still put the Embers of Muat.
Fair enough.
Uh, Probably, uh, I think, while being somewhat underrated by us, especially the Sardak Nor, still aren't as the huge buffs that they got. Just while they're fun, I don't believe they're any good. And probably the third of the weakest factions, I would myself, being a huge fan, I would probably put the Ghosts of Creus
That
as one of the possibly weakest factions in
that
the
part
game.
I actually find pretty interesting. That's something that I will want to discuss down the line, because you did mention yourself that versatility and mobility are the two things that really boost a faction up as one that's powerful in the meta. You don't really get much more mobility than the ghosts. Then again, I do understand they're not an extremely versatile faction. But I will actually want to come back to this a little bit, because personally, I probably plays Ghosts in my at least upper half of my action tier lists. I do think they're underrated. They're really good. But what would be, like you mentioned? These are the factions that are good, that can be good in very specific situations, and we usually see them being played in very specific situations, and we usually see them being performing at the very least decently, despite the fact that they are kind of on the weak side, except for the Sardak Nor. Personally, I don't think I've ever seen them in the game after the first one we ever played. um, so could you tell me, in your opinion, for, let's say, the Sardak Nor and the Muat, what exactly is it that slows them down, that bumps them down the list so much that they're at the very bottom? I would assume it's mobility and something else, a lack of adaptability. Did you?
Yeah, I would probably, both factions suffer from the same issue, I would say, but like, where the Embers suffer from early game mobility, Sardak suffers from early game strength. Uh, Embers, they're extremely immobile due to having the one War Sun, and it's very hard for them to get many systems early. That hurts their early game, and they're also extremely vulnerable in that early game, which means you're forced to play safe with them. And once you get to the late game with them, they're an extreme powerhouse. Their hero ability is
Mhm.
insane, but usually the game tends to end quicker before the Embers can leverage their power advantage. Because in Twilight Imperium, where everyone is trying to play for the objective, powers uh, essentially mean uh, power means more in early and the mid game, and then mobility and flexibility is the let's say the main tool in the
Mhm.
late rounds. Uh, the same sort of the same thing works for the Sardak Nor, since they are quite strong in combat even early, but they do not have technology. They cannot get gravity drive. They sort of, again, uh, can't really leverage their strength up until they get enough
Mhm.
technologies. And when they get those technologies, at that point, their strength is a lot less important. While still, they might be like, if I'm the neighbor of the Sardak Nor in the fifth round, I'm fucking scared, but I'm not fucking scared that they're gonna win. I'm scared that they're going to kill me. But if they kill me, they still don't win.
No,
So
that's
they're again very. they seem very strong, but to actually win the
They're
game,
very
that
strong.
they just do
They're
not
very
have the
strong, but
toolkit.
they're not exactly strong at doing what's the goal of the game. I do agree with you there.
Yeah,
We
pretty
do have a
much.
question in chat from one of the members of the audience. What about embers in a 14-point game? What's your opinion on that?
Well, both Sardak and Embers definitely get stronger in the 14-point game. Um, this is where sort of my thinking leads to believe that in these cases they seem quite a bit stronger, but those extra 4 points, since every player, and
Hmm.
I guess that's a bit more of the meta game side of it, not by strength of the sheer factions, but since everyone plans for not the fifth or sixth round to win, they plan for let's say seventh, eighth,
Hmm.
ninth round, then a lot of the time, even then, while they do get those extra 2 or maybe 3 rounds, they still usually are fairly, they pretty much get the role of the second strongest or third strongest player, who now is forced to stop the number one player, therefore sabotaging their own chances to
Hmm.
win. This is, in my experience, this is what I usually see, especially embers do, is that, oh, I have this hero ability and I can dominate my cluster of the galaxy, and I'm forced to use this by the other players to stop one of the winners, and usually that puts me in a position where I'm not strong enough to finish the game by my own
Fair
right.
enough. I do actually agree with that. In my opinion, the 14-point games and games with like 3 and 4 player games, 5 and 6 player games, 7 8 player games, and 10-point and 14-point games. Like in all of those combinations, they pretty much have their own separate tier lists. If we're talking about which factions are good in
Yeah.
them, one of the factions that I believe in a regular 6 player 10-point game, one of the ones that I believe is the worst is the Arborec, but in like a 3 or 4 player game, they're top of the list. Simply because they can overrun without much effort while getting more resources off the map. They can overrun the other players without all that much difficulty. And the Embers and Sardak Nor both they both get more time, more more peace and stability to establish themselves in 14 points, but they don't really get the tempo. And because they don't get the tempo, at the end of the day, it kind of still beats them back a little bit. Though I will say it is kind of fun to think about that in a lot of cases, the factions that are good in like 14-player games or 14-point games and 10-point games are actually kind of reversed. Like or more player games and less player games. Like I said, one of, in my opinion, the strongest faction in the game is the Nazaroka. And in an player game, I think they're probably one of the worst factions in the game because they will not
Hmm.
actually be able to get anything out of those explorations because there are enough players and enough explorations on the table that they're not doing for that exploration deck to just be all tapped out and for them not to just not get enough out of it, which just automatically makes them worse. But yes, thank you for the question. I also did notice that for some reason, like I mentioned, we were expecting some technical difficulties. For some reason, we are actually broadcasting in video as well, even though that should be disabled.
Hey, that's solid. Wasn't that a paid feature to broadcast
No, it is
video?
a free feature, but it is possible to turn it off, which I did do. I just checked the settings of the of the broadcast as well. We're supposed to only be broadcasting audio, but apparently, judging by some screenshots in our community group, we are also broadcasting video as well. Oh well, a freebie. Either way, let's move on. Now we've discussed factions and what in general makes factions better and worse. Um, I do agree with a lot of what you said, but thank you, Ignis. Oh, well, unfortunately, we didn't miss seeing our own ugly mugs, but hey, that's a freebie for you. So one thing we discussed is versatility, like, the ability to adapt to what happens in the game. Oh, and we have another viewer. The other thing I want to discuss, we already did, Muat. We already kind of discussed that you're one of the worst factions in the game. The other thing I want to discuss, besides versatility and what makes factions good, is mobility. You mentioned that despite liking them, you consider the Ghosts of Creus to be one of the worst factions in the game. I
Yeah.
personally disagree, but I do understand that they're built entirely around mobility. And like you said yourself, mobility is an important part a for a faction to be good. Why exactly is then are then ghosts not good, and what's like the golden middle ground of mobility? What do you need to have to be mobile enough to be good?
Gravity drive. It's pretty much the access to gravity drive
Don't
is
Kriya start with
the
that?
make it. Well, yes, I'll get to the point,
Go
but
ahead.
to start with the base level of mobility that is required to win the game, essentially you require gravity drive. You need the ability for your carriers in the early game to go two systems, to have the choice to go not to only to your adjacent systems but to go one third. In the late game, you require ships that can sometimes travel three systems or even four with flank speeds, or maybe you place your stronger but more vulnerable ships one system further, and you give them gravity drive. So you have entire fleets that have a mobility of at least two, or maybe even sometimes uh, three
Mm-hmm.
systems. That is, I think, the base requirement for any faction in absolutely any game of Twilight Imperium. Now, while Ghost of Krios definitely meet that, they also in the base game got a whole shit ton of extra mobility for wormholes, boosts out of wormholes, boosts into wormholes. Uh, they can pick and choose which wormholes to go to, and yeah, well, that's pretty good. The map is kind of not large enough to really use that well, and a lot of the time you get that extra mobility, but you do not get anything else to use that mobility with. And also uh, s- their start game is very weak, and it got even weaker when you compare it to the factions that got buffed in Prophecy of Kings. And what did ghosts get? Being, well, maybe before the expansion, they were like, I would say maybe a middle of the road, maybe a bit below average of a faction. They got more mobility. Well, the map didn't get bigger, so where am I
Well,
using that mobility?
technically, the map can get bigger.
Well, the yes, sure, the map can get bigger, but even in the 8 player map, that sort of mobility
Mhm.
is not very useful. I've seen games where Ghosts of Creus accidentally got such large fleets that suddenly the mobility got to be good, but usually you do not need 4 or 5
Mhm.
systems length of fleet reach. It's just too much. You're never going to use it as well, and then they get absolutely nothing
Fair
else.
enough.
So
I do in general agree with it. If you are ghosts and you automatically have a lot of mobility, probably more than you will ever need. But and this is the place where I think in general our thinking kind of diverges. I know we've discussed the meta of technologies in the past, and I believe you've said that technology is kind of solved. It's always blue tech. Blue tech is clearly superior, mainly because gravity drive, which I do agree. Gravity drive is in a vacuum outside of the game. just on its own, Gravity Drive is by far the best technology in the game. At I would say at early, mid, and late game at all points. But here's one thing that I want to kind of touch on. Is Gravity Drive that good, or are blue techs in general that good that they would outweigh any of the synergy or the immediate benefits that you might get situationally from other technologies for it to be worth it to focus into blue and to focus to get Gravity Drive? Like as an example, let's say when you're playing Space Goblins, the Yisrael, a lot of the time what you want to do is go green instead, because simply because of your faction technology that lets you steal action cards. And you can also dip into biostims in green, to be able to do that twice per round, which loots you a whole lot of action cards. It denies those action cards to other players. It gives you both options in terms of what to do in the game, because action cards can do that, and it gives you the option to stall. But it will also mean that at least until like mid to late game, you will not tag blue, because you will just not be able to if you go for that.
Yeah, and this is where I would say that's probably one of the two examples where maybe you wouldn't go for Gravity Drive. The other being our space lions are usually they would like to get what's the name of the technology? I keep forgetting. The Hakan tech that lets you take strategy
Quantum
cards
data
away.
node.
Quantum data hub node, yeah. So again, it's a yellow technology, and it's so good that you're willing to pick up the absolute crap that you get on the yellow and along the way because it's just so
Hmm.
immensely powerful. And that is kind of the same with goblins. I wouldn't say that stealing action cards is that powerful of an ability. It does synergize really, really well. But the thing is, if you say like have a green skip on Yusaril, and I would probably do this strategy of rushing of rushing green first only if I had a green skip in my on my slice, or one that's very
Hmm.
easily reachable. I Then you just get biostims, and the very next time you research, you're already there. You already have the three prerequisites. If you have the skip and biostims being green, it's along the way. And yeah, I guess if you really want to, if you can manage it somehow, you can get to hypermetabolism, which
Is not very good.
maybe if you get it like in the first round
Yeah.
might be worth it, or like maybe the second
I
if you have
do
nothing else
I
to
do
do
get
with
what
your
you're
cash.
saying. I'm not sure I'd say that it's, quite as few as those two situations. I do think it's situationally better to focus on other technologies as some factions, probably not the majority of them. Like maybe I'd say something like Titans that are already pretty built around their home slice and their systems and around mobility for like one off, like dagger strikes into enemy territory. Those factions just might get more from, let's say, yellow and transit diodes. They might get more out of that particular tech in the mid to late, at least, than Gravity Drive and Blue. But I do understand the idea that you are giving up a lot in order to possibly pick up the situationally powerful situationally powerful tech paths, and that can go big and can help you in specific situations, just blow away whatever you need to.
I think it sort of comes down to the the concept that you usually find in poker, which is that even the strongest hand that you can have, it can still lose There are still situations that the community cards, the river pops, and you got those two aces, but the guy drew two fives on the turn
Mm,
in river with their five in hands, and then their set beats your aces. But since Twilight Imperium is also a game with hidden information, when you start to make those choices is when you can't really know whether the situations that you will probably benefit more from, say, transit diodes than gravity drive, whether those situations will come up. If let's say there were, uh, if we were to play a game of Twilight Imperium uh, where we would know the public objectives that they come out, and that's going to be these public objectives. We still we still only have two at the very start, but we know that okay, these are these two, and the next one's going to be that, and the next one's going to be that. I would think in some cases, then yeah, you would have like maybe like 10% of games where players would probably not go for gravity drive because they would see, okay, well, on my slice I have all of these resources. I'm going to need 15 resources in round
mm,
4 to like do something, or I'm going to need like the 10 trade goods at round 5 to get the 2 pointer. Well, okay, maybe I don't need the mobility. Maybe I need to protect the planets that I already have, and I don't really care about any sort of reach of my fleets. I just need to defend. And yeah, in that case, I would say it's gonna be like 10, maybe even maybe 15% of games where probably players wouldn't take gravity drive. But since you can never know uh, the objectives in advance, you can never truly have knowledge of what's going to come in the next round. The the penalty of not having gravity drive is just too high. If the
mm.
situation calls for it, you're so deeply fucked if you don't have mobility that it doesn't.
I think
Well, it's the very rare situations where you get the
I
offset
think
with
what I
goblins.
was talking about isn't because I do agree that if a situation comes up where you need mobility and you don't have it, that's pretty much axing you right off the bat. Because at that point, if you're going to still need to perform whatever action that was that you needed the mobility for, all that it does is it makes it so that you need to do it to use two separate rounds, two separate actions to do it, and it delays you. And that delay kills your tempo, and because of that, you can't keep up. You automatically fall behind. I do agree with that. However, I think there are factions that have the capability to, if not offset gravity drive, to at the very least provide other methods of mobility. Like, for example,
Yeah.
Titans. So the question is at that point, do
Yep.
Titans need gravity drive? Is there something else that they will just benefit more from because they're already offsetting the benefits of gravity drive? Do we need to do the Korea situation in this case where we might need overkill mobility at some point?
Well, probably Titans. Yeah, Titans are probably one of the factions that's off the get go. You would think that I will probably need gravity drive. I have these three three mobility cruisers. I won't need it. But then a situation pops up where you need to carry more than two guys in one ship, and your fleet limit is low, and you need that carrier to travel two instead of one. And then suddenly you still fucking need gravity drive, even if you have the carriers. But yeah, I definitely see a situation where uh, Titans or maybe like Argent Flight wouldn't need it. But then in practice, of what I've seen, everyone, including me, play, you still need gravity drive, even with those factions, and even with ghosts. Even if you have that insane mobility, the simple unconditional +1 to any ship is too good to
And
pass on.
gravity drive is the one thing that you will always be happy to have, no matter what. And it will always be useful. Having there's no tech in the game where having it hurts you, except maybe salt cannon. Like that's the only one that can actually hurt you
Yeah, yeah,
if you have it.
it does.
But Gravity Drive is the one that you're always going to be happy to have, and it's always going to help you, not just hurt you. Yeah, in general, yeah, I do agree.
Yeah, for
The
sure.
blue tech path in general is just insanely insanely above the other tech paths in a vacuum. I do think it can be worse
Yeah.
depending on the situation. Okay. One more thing then. Let's move on from technologies a little bit, hopefully. So we've discussed what makes factions good or bad. We've discussed some of the lower tier factions. Now, let's try a little bit of a thought exercise. Let's take the two bottom factions we discussed, the Muad and the Sardak Nor. How would you make them better without strictly just, let's say, plopping Gravity Drive on just their sheet? How would you make those two factions better and more adaptive to the game?
Hmm. Um, I want to preface before giving you the solution. I don't want to
Fair
make them
enough.
better.
Completely,
I
completely
think that's.
understandable.
But if I were to make them better, okay, I would take away Embers of Muat Warsun and give them two carriers and get them 4 or 5 infantry so that they can take the fucking two systems at the start of the game, as every single faction should be able to. That's pretty much
Mhm.
the solution. But take and kind of the same with Sardak. Take away the combat bonus, make it a technology, but have them have technology and have them not so disadvantaged in uh, in
Mhm.
their setup.
Uh,
But that would be taking away the faction's
yeah,
identity.
it kind of
So sort of making them better is effectively remove them from the game.
don't play them.
It's probably the perfect solution is you
Yeah,
don't play Muad.
don't play
You
them.
just
Then they're
don't
gonna
play
be
them.
good in theory, which is exactly the stance our group has taken with the Sardak Nor. Um,
Pretty
I
much.
would say I'm pretty sure the Villas actually left. Patricius,
That's fair
I'm
enough.
pretty sure the Villas actually left the broadcast. But I do agree that just transforming their abilities or like taking out the Muad Warsun, it kind of kills their identity. I'd say that maybe for the Muad, it might be a little bit simpler. You don't even give them a carrier, give them a dreadnought. One dreadnought in addition to that Warsun, and nothing else.
Oh, then
Then
they're
they're
too
too strong.
strong. Then they beat every single faction in the game, bar none, because because their war son is suddenly not
Their
vulnerable.
Warsun is not
The
vulnerable
problem there.
immediately. But at that point, they have to choose whether or not they want to bring that dreadnought with the Warsun as a shield for it, which again stops them from taking two systems, or do they want an extra
Well, I
system?
guess I would just go. Yeah, I know what you mean, but then I would just go Clan of Sar strategy, and
Full death
I
ball.
would have such an overwhelming fleet that I could just continue onto one side and never really worry about the safety, because right now you can try and do that. You have the overwhelming firepower in one system with Moat, but like two concentrated attacks and a couple of bad rolls, and suddenly you're very very vulnerable and people can counterattack. The extra dreadnought, uh, that would be way too strong in my opinion.
Fair enough. I'd say probably an extra cruiser or an extra carrier, I'm sorry, would be more so, but
No, get
an
extra
extra
carrier
carrier
also
would be
in a
would
different
be
way.
just far too much protection for that Warsun.
Yeah, this
The
is the same
Sardak
thing.
though,
You can give more ships, is what I'm trying to say. You can't give them more ships. You have to take away the war sun if you want to. If you want to make them better and more consistent, you can only make them overpowered.
fair enough. Just shows how balanced this game actually is, even for the factions that are not balanced at all. Okay, that's a fair point. So in general, the idea is bad factions are slow and unadaptive. They're very, very set in what they're gonna do. Now, I have One more topic that I kind of want to discuss with you. It's not exactly about what's good and what's bad. It here we might be touching on the social aspect of the game a little bit more. Um, I've got it noted down on my side here as a very simple question: does the meta matter? Like the way we play and the way in general most people play Twilight Imperium is as a social game first of all, and when you're playing a social game, does the power of the faction actually matter that much? Or is it more a matter of who's playing it? Because, for example, you won the last Twilight Fest game as the Yin Brotherhood, which is kind of universally regarded, at least online, in circles that discuss the meta as one of the worst factions in the game. I've won it as the Necrovirus, which is a pretty decent faction, but it's around mid tier, maybe above mid tier. We've had, I think, Lizix win one of those games as well. In all honesty, I think on average, more of our games are won by the meta worse factions than the meta good ones.
Well, I wouldn't quite say I understand the premise that you're saying, and I completely agree. Uh, uh, I think that the mechanical meta is a tool to be used in the social meta game. If I'm playing a weaker faction, while it definitely matters, and in a lot of situations that means that I have a disadvantage. A lot of the time, since this is a game of more of a political tendency, other players will recognize the fact that I'm playing a weaker faction, and they will be more lenient
Hmm.
towards me. So I think that's what mainly balances out each of the factions, and what kind of allows you even to play the weaker factions. And that is exactly why most of the factions that are, let's say, not specially mobile, not specially strong, the mid tiers is why they definitely win quite a lot. Because the mid tier factions, they do not have crippling disabilities, but they're not looked at as these
Hmm.
mega threats by other players. So yeah, I think the answer to this, no, I don't think the mechanical game matters much at all. I very much enjoy that technologies are solved and that players pretty much have one choice, because we can get to the meat of the game, which is
The
the politicking,
politics, the
which is the
scheming, the
scheming, the
backstabbing, the
scheming.
deal making, and the general interaction, which is as far as I've seen so far, kind of unique to Twilight, where everybody just turns into a goddamn sociopath and everybody gets along somehow. Yeah, I do agree as well. At the end of the day, I do think that the playing of the lower end factions, it doesn't really get in the way that much because, like you mentioned, it factors into the social metagame. People are more lenient towards you to a point, because at the end of the day, every faction is still a threat in specific situations. And if you're lenient towards them, I think we've reached the point where everybody understands if you let them reach the situation where they can be a threat, then the fact that they're technically a bad faction doesn't really matter. But this is going a bit too much into the social aspect of the metagame, which is something I want to discuss on another day. And I do agree that in general, as far as factions winning goes, we do have kind of a bell curve where the mid tiers are the dominant ones because they just balance
Pretty much, yeah.
mechanics and the social aspect of the game pretty goddamn well. And yeah, we've spent 45 minutes talking about the meta, and hell yeah, the meta does not matter at all.
Absolutely. It, well,
Maybe not at all, but
again, it does
it
matter,
doesn't.
but I use the mechanical
Yeah,
meta as a tool to
it
convince
the
other players to help
mechanical
me.
the
That's pretty much
mechanical
what it is
meta.
for.
Uh, the mechanical meta is basically a difficulty select for the social aspect of the game.
Maybe a little bit, yeah. One example, which is fairly does support this idea, I think, is our Clan of Sar
which is
win rate,
zero,
right?
I believe.
Clan of Sar being mechanically,
I
is it
don't.
still
I
zero?
have never seen anyone win with SAR. Um,
I've haven't either. I've never won with them too, and every single time I get really dang close, like so close. But the problem is, well, maybe it's our game. Uh, we've uh, we've nurtured a lot of very
mhm,
reactive play, which means if players see and feel that there's uh, a dominant faction on the table, they will dogpile them, and the faction will get stopped. It's very uncommon for factions like Clan of Sar or Vuil Wraith Cabal, which are mechanically like insanely strong in terms of holding territory and resources and taking them away from other players. If I were to do that same strategy with a weaker faction, I would get punished way less because the feeling part of the
you
game
would
is, is
kind of.
is that
I think.
strong. Is
I
that
think this specifically is a threat of stability, purely through military might. I might say because both like SAR, World Wraith, Titans, and Argent to a lesser extent, they're all built to be militarily powerful, but they're built to be militarily powerful for just stability, holding your territory, protecting it, having a massive fleet that can do that, and also continue, getting whatever additional resources you might need for other objectives. um and when people see that you can do that, you can both protect yourself properly and expand further, they just immediately see a very valid and massive threat, and they just immediately put that
yeah,
down.
people are afraid of it. It's
Yeah,
the fear. It's the fear.
there's always the
That's the
question of
problem.
whether
Uh,
or not they'll turn that big gun towards me. And at some point, they
yep.
will.
It's
If they need to, they will.
Yep, and this is why I tend to like to dominate the board militarily with factions that are not so obvious. Because the problem with the strong factions is that you kind of get stuck in this loop of, okay, so the other players on the table expect me to fucking shoot everyone. They're afraid of me, and they are already reacting because I have the capability to do so. So at that point, the only course of action I can do is to try and shoot everyone before they shoot
Fair
me.
enough.
And sort of, yeah. If I take Wheel Wraith, if I go for Sar, I know that I'm going to fucking fight everyone over it, even though I never wanted to do it. It's just usually you just get forced into that action, and at some point, inevitably, you will have to do it because people are afraid of you that much that they will start the conflicts, and since you will win those conflicts on mechanical terms, you're still the
Yeah,
aggressor
at
and you're
that point,
still the villain if you do
people
it.
will start conflict because you're threatening. They will attack you preemptively with full Russia strats, and then when you win that war, you become an additional threat because you won a war and you're still standing. You're powerful enough to now become threatening to everyone, and you're going to devour part of the attacker because, hey, you need to make up your losses somehow. And everyone will see that, and they'll see you as the aggressor. You're settling their territory. Yeah, I completely agree in that regard.
Yeah.
Weaker factions kind of get away with it a little bit more because nobody really starts that conflict with them. And when weaker factions are militarily stronger, because they're a weaker faction, nobody really takes into account that, hey, you still have the plastic, you still have the fleets, you still have the ability. You don't have those extra bonuses that
Yeah,
a strong faction has, but you still have power.
it doesn't really matter if I'm ghosts with 5 dreadnoughts, I
Yeah,
still have
it's
five
still a
dreadnoughts.
five
Like
dread fleet.
it's
Hot damn, Ghost with five dreadnoughts. That's an extremely mobile five dread fleet. That's terrifying, honestly. Gita's coming in with the hard questions. Which faction leader has the biggest penis?
I think it's a really easy question, actually, and I can answer it in two ways. Obviously, the Arborec have the largest penis. because it's a one planet-sized organism. The penis would have to be the size of a mountain at
I
the
was
very least. It's gonna be the
I
size
was
of a
gonna say
moon.
it's
That
either Arborek or Titans because canonically Titans are like the size of a warship.
yeah, it's gonna be Titans, but then maybe we're talking about then there's the other possibility of we're talking about not the actual size of the penis. We're talking about the size to body
Fair enough.
ratio,
In that case, probably
and
Yisrael.
that's a more difficult question. That might be Yisrael.
Because
Yeah.
they can definitely slap you down with a massive action schlong. Okay, I think we're just about running out of time today. Polo, thank you very much for joining me for a little discussion of game mechanics that might or might not matter. Thank you for everybody who joined us in the audience at any point who asked their burning questions out of the two participants of the discussion today. I have been Ignis, and it has been a pleasure discussing the game for you folks, and we will see you hopefully next month. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks for listening, guys. Goodbye.